Somewhere in your home right now, a wolf is probably lying at your feet. Not a wild one, not a dangerous one, but genetically, biologically, it is still a wolf, wearing a costume of floppy ears and a wagging tail, sleeping on your couch as if it has always belonged there. 15,000 years ago, that same animal would have circled your ancestors in the dark, sizing them up as either threat or prey. Something happened in between, something that turned one of the most feared predators on the planet into the first being outside our own species that humans ever truly trusted. How does that happen? How do you convince a wild animal, one with claws, fangs, instincts built entirely around survival and suspicion, to walk into your camp and stay there, generation after generation, until it forgets it was ever wild at all? And it did not stop with wolves. Somewhere along the way, humans convinced wild cattle the size of small trucks to pull their plows. They convinced skittish, prey-driven sheep and goats to follow them instead of fleeing at the first sign of danger. They even, more improbably, convinced a small, solitary, famously uncooperative wildcat to move into their homes and, arguably, take them over. This did not happen once by accident in a single lucky afternoon. It happened dozens of times across thousands of years on different continents with completely different species. And yet, out of the millions of wild animal species on Earth, only a tiny handful ever crossed that line. Why? The story of domestication is not really about animals becoming tame. It is about something far stranger, two completely different species, human and animal, changing each other permanently at the level of behavior and even genetics until neither one could fully go back to what it was before. To understand how this began, you have to go back further than farming, further than villages, back to a time when humans were still nomadic hunters, and wolves were simply one more predator competing for the same prey across the same frozen landscapes. For a long time, the wolf and the human were rivals, not partners. Both hunted large game. Both worked in coordinated groups. Both were smart enough to track, ambush, and adapt. In a strange way, that rivalry is exactly what made the relationship possible. These were two intelligent social predators, circling the same resources, occasionally circling each other. Somewhere between 14,000 and 40,000 years ago, something shifted. Nobody knows the exact date, and researchers still debate the details. But the leading scientific explanation does not involve some brave human deciding to raise wolf pups by hand. It is far less romantic than that and far more believable. Wolves likely domesticated themselves. Human camps were messy. Bones, scraps, discarded food, waste, all piled up around every fire pit and settlement. For a wolf, that mess was an opportunity, a source of calories that required none of the danger of hunting large prey. But approaching a human camp was risky. Only the boldest wolves would try it, and only the calmest ones would survive the attempt without provoking a spear or an arrow. This is where a critical filter kicked in, one that had nothing to do with human intention at all. The wolves that could tolerate proximity to humans without panicking, without attacking, without fleeing at every sound, were the ones who got to eat the scraps. The aggressive wolves, the fearful wolves, the ones who could not handle the tension of being near people, either got killed or simply left. Generation after generation, camp after camp, this created a slow, silent selection pressure favoring calmness and tolerance around humans. And here is the part that should genuinely surprise you. Tameness is not just a personality trait. It appears to be linked at a deep biological level to a whole cluster of physical changes that have nothing obviously to do with behavior. In the late 1950s, a Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev began one of the most famous experiments in the history of biology. Working with silver foxes on a fur farm, he selected only the calmest individuals in each generation to breed, animals that showed the least fear and aggression toward humans, and nothing else. He was not selecting for floppy ears or shorter snouts or patches of white fur. He was selecting purely for tameness. Within just a few generations, something remarkable began appearing. The foxes did not just become friendlier. Their ears started to flop. Their tails began to curl. Patches of white fur appeared on their coats. Their skulls became slightly shorter and rounder, more juvenile in shape. None of these traits were being selected for directly. They emerged as side effects of selecting for calm behavior alone, suggesting that tameness and certain physical traits are wired together deep in an animal's developmental biology. This experiment offered scientists a working model for what may have happened naturally with wolves thousands of years earlier, without any human breeding program at all. Nature itself was running Belyaev's experiment, just far more slowly, using survival instead of a scientist's deliberate selection. Over enough generations, the boldest, calmest wolves that could tolerate human presence began looking less like their wild ancestors. Their skulls shortened slightly, their jaws grew a bit smaller, their fur developed new color patterns. Slowly, without anyone planning it, wolves were becoming dogs, not because humans set out to invent a new species, but because a subtle filter, repeated over thousands of years, rewarded calmness over aggression every single time. Eventually, that relationship deepened even further. Genetic research on ancient dog remains, including work led by geneticist Gregor Larson at Oxford University, suggests that this transformation may have happened independently in more than one location, with early dog lineages later mixing and spreading alongside human populations as they migrated across the world. The wolf that once competed with humans for prey slowly became something else entirely: a hunting partner, a guard, a companion, and eventually a member of the household. But dogs were only the beginning. The deeper mystery is why almost nothing else on the entire planet followed the same path. Around 10,000 years ago, human societies underwent a shift as important as anything before or since: the beginning of agriculture. Once humans began staying in one place, growing crops and building permanent settlements, a new question emerged. If plants could be cultivated deliberately, could animals be too? The answer, it turned out, was almost always no. There are more than 5,000 species of mammals on Earth. Only a small handful, roughly a dozen or so, ever became widely and successfully domesticated for agriculture, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, and a few others. That number becomes even more striking when you consider how many powerful, useful, seemingly perfect candidates never made the cut. Why not zebras? They are essentially African horses, related closely enough that they can occasionally interbreed with actual horses. Wouldn't a domesticated zebra have been enormously useful across the continent? And yet no civilization ever successfully domesticated them at scale. Why not gazelles, deer, or antelope, fast, efficient converters of grass into meat found across huge portions of the world? Why not grizzly bears, which are certainly intelligent and adaptable enough to learn complex behaviors? The geographer and scientist Jared Diamond offered one of the most influential explanations for this puzzle, sometimes referred to as the Anna Karenina principle, based on the idea that successful domestication requires an animal to meet several very specific conditions simultaneously, and failing even one of them rules the entire species out. A domesticable animal generally needs a manageable diet, one that does not require enormous amounts of specialized food humans cannot easily provide. It needs a reasonably fast growth rate so that raising it to a useful size does not take an impractically long time. It needs to breed successfully in captivity, which sounds simple but eliminates far more species than people expect. It needs a generally calm temperament that does not pose serious danger to the humans raising it, and it needs a social structure built around a clear dominance hierarchy, because that hierarchy is exactly what allows a human to essentially replace the alpha animal at the top of the group, with the rest of the herd following as they naturally would. Zebras fail this test almost immediately. Despite their resemblance to horses, zebras are notoriously aggressive, unpredictable, and prone to biting and refusing to stop once they start, injuries reported by professional handlers throughout history. Their nervous systems seem to react to danger with a hair-trigger intensity that never fully calms down, even across many generations of captivity. Deer and gazelle largely fail a different requirement. Many panic so severely in enclosed spaces that they can injure or kill themselves in blind attempts to escape, a stress response so extreme that even short-term captivity can be lethal. Grizzly bears fail almost every category at once, slow to reproduce, enormous appetites, and simply too dangerous for the margin of error domestication requires. Cattle, on the other hand, check nearly every box. Wild ancestors of cattle, known as aurochs, lived in structured herds with a clear dominant leader. Early herders realized that if a human could occupy that dominant position within the herd's social structure, the rest of the herd would follow. Largely unbothered by the substitution, sheep and goats offered a similar advantage: manageable size, herd mentality, and a diet built around grasses that required no special effort to provide. Horses added something entirely new to the human story: speed and power that could be harnessed for both transportation and warfare, transforming trade routes, military conflict, and the movement of entire civilizations across continents in ways no earlier domesticated species had done. And then there is the cat, an animal that almost seems to defy the entire model. Cats are solitary, not herd animals. They do not have a clear dominance hierarchy that a human could step into. They do not offer meat, wool, or labor in any traditional agricultural sense. And yet cats found their way into human civilization anyway, through an entirely different route. When early farming communities began storing surplus grain, they inadvertently created a paradise for rodents, and rodents attracted wildcats. Much like wolves near human campfires, the wildcats that could tolerate proximity to humans without fleeing or attacking gained access to an abundant, easy food source, while the more skittish or aggressive individuals kept their distance. Over time, this created a slow, self-directed domestication process remarkably similar to what likely happened with the earliest dogs, driven by opportunity and tolerance rather than deliberate human breeding. Genetic research led by scientists including Carlos Driscoll at the National Cancer Institute traced the origins of the domestic cat to wildcats native to the Near East, showing that unlike dogs, cats appear to have undergone comparatively modest genetic changes from their wild ancestors, suggesting a domestication process that was, in some ways, gentler and less thorough. In many respects, a modern house cat is not far removed from a wildcat that simply decided the benefits of living near humans outweighed the risks. This reveals something profound about domestication as a whole. It was never a single event, a single method, or even a single kind of relationship. Some animals, like dogs and cats, largely domesticated themselves by tolerating human proximity in exchange for food. Others, like cattle, sheep, and goats, were domesticated through deliberate human management of breeding, movement, and herd structure. And some animals, no matter how useful they might have seemed, simply could not cross the threshold required, regardless of how badly humans might have wanted them to. Researchers studying animal cognition, including primatologist Brian Hare, have proposed that this entire process might be better understood as a story of selection for a very specific trait: social tolerance. Animals capable of reading human behavior, tolerating close proximity, and responding calmly to human presence and intention were the ones that thrived alongside our species. While animals lacking that particular flexibility were left behind in the wild, regardless of their intelligence, strength, or usefulness in other respects. Once domestication took hold, its effects on human civilization were staggering. Domesticated animals provided a stable, reliable source of meat, milk, and materials that did not depend on the unpredictable success of a hunt. Cattle and horses provided labor and transportation that reshaped agriculture, trade, and warfare, allowing populations to grow far beyond what hunting and gathering alone could ever support. Dense human settlements, built on the surplus food that domesticated animals and crops together made possible, gave rise to specialized labor, early governments, organized trade networks, and eventually, the first cities. Pigs followed a path of their own, one that sits somewhere between the self-domestication of dogs and the deliberate herd management behind cattle and sheep. Wild boars, much like early wolves, were drawn toward human settlements by the easy calories scattered around them, discarded food, unharvested scraps. The general mess that follows any group of people living in one place for long. Boars bold enough to tolerate that proximity without triggering the alarm of nearby humans gained a steady food source that far outpaced anything available in the forest. Over generations, this created pigs that were smaller, calmer, and far less dangerous than their wild ancestors. Animals that could be kept close to a settlement without constant risk, valued for their remarkable ability to convert almost any kind of food waste into usable meat. Horses reveal something else entirely about how domestication can quietly reshape the balance of power between civilizations. Genetic evidence suggests that horses were domesticated later than cattle or goats, likely somewhere on the steppes of Central Asia, among populations who depended heavily on wide-open grassland for grazing. Once tamed, horses did something no previous domesticated animal had managed. They collapsed distance. A journey that once took days on foot could be completed in hours. Armies that once moved at walking pace could suddenly outmaneuver and outrun anyone who had not yet gained access to the same animal. Trade networks stretched further, faster, and more reliably than ever before, carrying goods, ideas, and information across distances that had previously felt impossibly remote. In a very real sense, the horse did not just serve human civilization. For centuries, it quietly determined which civilizations would expand, which would trade successfully, and which would be overtaken by others who happened to master the same animal first. There was, however, a darker side to this transformation that researchers only fully understood much later. Close, sustained contact between humans and domesticated animals created new opportunities for diseases to jump between species, a process scientists call zoonotic transmission. Some of history's most devastating epidemics trace their origins to pathogens that evolved within domesticated animal populations before making the leap into human populations. A grim but scientifically well-documented cost buried within one of humanity's greatest achievements. Seen this way, domestication was never simply a story of animals surrendering their wildness to serve human needs. It was a genuine partnership, built slowly and often accidentally, in which both species changed. Dogs lost some of the caution and independence of their wolf ancestors, but gained an entirely new kind of life, embedded within human families and communities in a way no wild wolf ever experiences. Humans, in turn, gained access to labor, transportation, food security, and companionship that permanently altered the trajectory of our species, allowing populations to expand, specialize, and eventually build the complex societies we live in today. Every dog curled up on a couch, every herd of cattle grazing across open pasture, every cat perched indifferently on a windowsill, carries within it the echo of that original cautious negotiation between two species that had every biological reason to fear one another and somehow gradually learned not to. The wolf that once circled your ancestors' campfire in the dark never fully disappeared. It simply learned that survival no longer required distance, and in trusting that instinct, both species crossed a threshold that changed the future of life on this planet together in ways neither could have predicted and neither has ever fully left behind.